Zulu Pods is an aerospace company, and we make lubrication systems simpler. Pods is actually an acronym for Packaged Oil Delivery System, which is what our pods do. Instead of using gallons of oil, we go to milliliters of oil. There's weight savings in there, there's performance benefits, there's cost saving. Our technology is revolutionary, but so is our culture. We have a good balance of having the engineers and anyone working there to be able to see the hardware as well as work on the hardware.
Welcome to the Opportunity Miami podcast. Today we're so glad to have with us Daniella Sladen, the CTO and co-founder of Zulu Pods. Daniella, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's hop right in. Can you tell us a little bit about what Zulu Pods is and why you started the company?
Sure. So Zulu Pods is an aerospace company, and we make lubrication systems simpler. My husband and I, we both were aerospace engineers in the field, and we were working on the lubrication system of these jet engines, and they are complex. They're very complex for their mission. When we found out that there were smaller engines and their missions were only, let's say, 15 to 30 minutes, to me, something clicked in my head, like, if a car was to go only for 1 mile, the car would be looking very differently. It would be designed very differently. So why aren't they designing these engines differently? Why don't they just provide a burst of oil instead of the whole oil system? And that's where the genesis of the Tide Pod for the jet engine started.
How long has Zulu Pods been up and running?
This has been since July 2020, so about 4.5 years.
Let's rewind to 4.5 years ago. Can you walk us through a little bit of kind of, you got this idea, you tested it out with a couple of folks. Where did you go from there, and how did you build this company?
So it actually started on a car ride. My husband and I were driving, the kids were sleeping in the back, and we were like, we finally have time to talk. We started talking about this Tide Pod for the jet engine, and as soon as we arrived to our destination, we started looking up patent attorneys. Is this patented? Can we patent this? Do we know somebody in the space? And then we went on to do, the patent searches. Then we reached out to old colleagues, and we figured out maybe we could do some sort of rig test or small subscale testing to prove out the concept, to show people what we're trying to accomplish. And we were able to do that and raise some funds off of that proof of concept test. And that allowed, some of us to go on full time. And with that, we raised a friends and family round. And then we now have government contracts and capital partners. And those building blocks really set the foundation of Zulu Pods.
Can you speak a little bit to the benefits of Zulu Pods? So versus the traditional approach, what does Zulu Pod really bring in terms of efficiencies, et cetera?
Instead of using gallons of oil, we go to milliliters of oil, teaspoons of oil. And because we can meter it in a specific way, right by what needs the oil, the part that needs the oil, this allows us to not use as much oil. So you can imagine that there's weight savings in there, there's performance benefits, there's cost saving. So all of that is a benefit to the customer, the person buying this engine. What happened with the first application was, once we started working with the government, the Army really liked our pods for an emergency application. So let's say for helicopters, for a last burst of oil to take the helicopter to be able to land safely in the event of a loss of lubrication.
So I understand that you all received a Small Business Innovation and Research grant from the federal government. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and then how you've leveraged it to grow your business?
Sure. So these SBIR grants come in phases. So you apply for phase 1, and that's really validating the technology. Like, is it feasible? Then you go into phase 2, where you partner up with a company that is like an engine manufacturer for us. That would be for phase 2 for us. And then the goal is to go into phase 3 commercialization. So these grants help underwrite your technology and almost, give it the stamp of approval. It's been through the technology levels to mature the technology to sell it.
And so where are you now in this process?
So we are in phase 2 with 2 of those types of grants with the Army and the Navy.
One of the things that we're focused on at Opportunity Miami is building an inclusive economy where everybody can participate at an optimal level no matter what they look like or where they come from. And I think you're living proof that, the best comes from around the world, from different communities, and so we'd love to understand a little bit more about your own personal journey.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I went to school at the University of Central Florida. It's where I received my bachelor's in aerospace engineering. And that was not my first major. I came in as undecided. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. But I knew that I wanted to do something with math or science because growing up in an immigrant household, math is like a universal language. Maybe not English, maybe not writing, but math is the same in every language. I literally opened the course catalog and I was like, okay, engineering seems like, I didn't really know what engineering was. And aerospace, alphabetically was the first one. And I just figured I would try that. It's right by the Space Coast of Florida. Maybe I'll get a job at like NASA or something. And that's how I started my journey into aerospace engineering.
Your background, it's fascinating. And, can you talk a little bit about your career before founding Zulu Pods and kind of what you were able to do and how you're leveraging that in your current role?
Mm-hmm. So I worked as a structural engineer in the field, and that helped me really understand the technical guts of the engine, the inside, how it works. Eventually, I found myself working on the external parts of the engine. So I learned a lot about specifically what I'm doing right now, the lubrication system of the engine, to learn how to optimize it best. And I think that really helped, that experience and being in, the corporate world of seeing how these big companies are run and the ideas, how they get brought. And maybe a small idea that I thought of there may not have been brought up to make this change, this big change. It would be a lot to create a product like a Zulu Pod at a bigger company when maybe there's reasons for them to be resistant to such a big change. But I'm glad that I was able to, start my own company and do it the way that I would want to, because our technology is revolutionary, but so is our culture. Like, it's very different because I know what it was like to work for these companies, and I know what I would want, what kind of company I would want to work for, and people would want to work for. And I feel like that makes also a difference, is how we have our culture at our company.
Can you talk a little bit about the types of people that you're seeing that are having success in this field and the type of people that you bring on the Zulu Pods?
I feel like specifically for engineers, I think part of the equation is also being able to be hands-on with the things that you're working on. Sometimes when you're in a bigger company, and I've experienced this, you're at a desk job and all you see is the model, the 3D model that's on the screen, but you never really get to physically see that part. How big is it? How does it work? I feel as Zulu Pods, we have a good balance of having the engineers and anyone working there to be able to see the hardware as well as work on the hardware. And I feel like that makes like a well-rounded engineer. I think that's something that we do really well.
So Zulu Pods, that's an interesting name. What made Zulu Pods the name of this company?
So Zulu is actually the last letter of the phonetic alphabet that the military uses. We also hear people say Bravo Zulu on a job well done, and that's kind of how we came up with Zulu. Pods is actually an acronym for Packaged Oil Delivery System, which is what our pods do, and that's how the name was born, Zulu Pods.
So your company's been around a few years now. So how many employees do you have, and what do you see as your growth projections moving forward?
We have 21 full-time employees now. We are looking to grow. We have a Massachusetts office right now. It's where we do all of our manufacturing. We are looking to open up a Florida office, and that will allow us to create a new business unit here in Florida and have the people that have been remote, bringing them to an office.
And so as you grow, I mean, you're growing both in terms of, ideally in terms of people, but also in terms of revenue. You focused on the military up until now with the SBIR grants, and I guess the goal is long-term to go on the commercial side. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy in terms of focusing on the military, and then ultimately where you see the commercial opportunities?
So I think we started where we knew. What we knew was a gap in the architecture of the engine, which were military engines. That application then took off to the backup application for helicopters. And then we have a new application now. It's an anti-corrosion pod. So it's to help preventative maintenance and to help with the issue of rust in the field. So these anti-corrosion pods can be used commercially, not just the military. So I think that would be our entry into the commercial market, is with this new application.
Can you explain to us a little bit more why this lubrication process is so important, why it matters, and kind of why this has the potential implications on industry that Zulu Pods can have over the long term?
Okay, so just like your car needs oil and you need to get an oil change every so often, so do engines, and engines need this oil to lubricate the bearings. So the bearing compartments are the mechanical piece that need that oil. And traditionally, what happens is oil gets dumped into the bearing compartment, and it almost creates more heat if you have more oil. If you get really good at lubricating this mechanical component that needs the oil, you really only need a little bit of oil. And that's what we're doing with Zulu Pods, is we're going from, like I said, gallons of oil to milliliters of oil.
One of the things that you are tackling is really changing the narrative that aerospace engineering is a man's space. You co-founded the company with your husband, but you're also a Latina. Can you share a little bit of insight into how that has shaped your journey as an entrepreneur, and perhaps provide advice to others that are out there that are considering launching companies or going into fields that have traditionally been dominated by men?
I feel like I always felt like I was a minority and the only woman in classes and college, at work. And what really shaped and changed, was a pivotal moment for me, was when I became a mother. Coming back from maternity leave and seeing how, people might have always treated you a little different for being a woman or Latina. But then when you're a mom, it really does hit you that things are different. I feel like that might have lit a fire in me to keep going and go further for my children and for something bigger than myself.
That's great. What advice would you give to others that are considering making the leap of launching businesses and that sort of thing?
I would say they just have to really believe and have conviction that what they're doing is solving a problem. And what helped me was just having a little validation from the market, like that direct feedback, going back to maybe mentors or people in the field and asking them, is this a crazy idea? What do you think about this? And you learn more with every single interaction that you have with anyone in the community, in investing community, what they're looking for versus what they're not looking for. In industry, what would they buy versus what wouldn't they buy? Having those touch points with people in the industry to see how you can validate your idea and how it grows to the next idea. What's the next step? What's the next test? That helped.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us. Daniella Sladen,
Thank
co-founder
you.
and CTO of Zulu Pods.